are darker than blue. Don't let us hang around this town and let what others say come true. We're just good for nothing. They all figure a boy should roll up shoulders just.
Welcome, everyone, and I hope you are holding up well in this really sweltering Washington, D.C. heat. How are you doing? I hope well. This is Jackie Lukeman, and this is Darker Than Blue, the show where you just heard Brother Curtis Mayfield say we talk about politics for the people that he just said are darker than blue. That's me and you, folks, and Ooh, yeah, what a sobering day. What a difficult day. So much news happening, so much chaos, so much violence, so much death, just so much of everything that nobody, well, I won't say nobody, because clearly some people did vote for this kind of thing because some people like this kind of thing. They believe this is some of that constructive destruction that a lot of capitalists believe in, that, hey, sometimes to get something better, you got to destroy something first. And we're going to talk about ideology today, but I hope in a way that is interesting and maybe even tell a few jokes to lift your spirits a little bit, even as we are dealing with such an incredibly overwhelming crisis of what seems like a morality in this country and around the world, but what it really is capitalism and imperialism. That's what they are. So I wanted to talk about how we talk about these issues today on this show, and how on social media, even though I love social media because it's been able to help me broadcast information and messages and learn things and meet people who I probably would never have met before, and information and things that I didn't know before. And I hope I've provided information to people that they didn't know before. That's what social media is good at: disseminating information and connecting people all over the world. And those are fantastic things, I think. However, I think the shortcomings with social media has been evident in the way we have tried to engage and talk about these issues that we deal with, that we're still dealing with, and we're trying to find an answer to. But it just seems like social media is not the best place to have these, what people call debates, but they're not really debates. They're actually just flat out arguments. And usually you don't change people's minds in arguments. And at this point, I'm not so convinced that changing people's minds is the thing that we need to be focusing on top of mind. Of course, why we share information is so that we can tell people something that maybe they didn't know before, but maybe changing people's hearts and minds isn't the thing that we should be the most focused on doing. Maybe the thing we should be most focused on doing is just countering people's myths or their ideology that's based on myths or outdated information, or information that was just a flat out lie in the beginning. Instead of trying to change their hearts and minds, just give them the facts. But see, the thing is, we can't do that if we don't know the facts ourselves. Not just the facts in response to what they believe, but also the facts that go into why people believe the things they do. That, I think, is the key. And that's the problem with social media. We don't start there, understanding why people believe the things they do. We start with the argument, and the argument is, why do you believe that? That's ridiculous. I don't agree. This is what you should believe. I don't think that's the right approach. And maybe I'm wrong. I'm just thinking maybe we should try to do something a little different. Because look, If you're like me, y'all, you've always wondered why politicians who don't want to spend government money to help us in material ways that will improve our lives here are also quick to spend the same government money to bomb other countries into submission, claiming they're doing it to help them. And then we find out that the countries they've bombed were doing things with their government money to help their people. And the rank hypocrisy of US government officials who posture as moral crusaders of purity and individualism and the right to decide what you want to do with your life outside of government interference, turning right around and deciding that other countries' governments and their people deserve to be interfered with by the US government is, I mean, come on, that hypocrisy is just glaring at this point. It should be. But I think people are still wondering where this hypocrisy comes from, and not so much about the politicians, because, that hypocrisy is useful to them. It keeps them in office because it keeps their constituents scared of the other, and it keeps their constituents voting for them, keeping them in power, right? I think people are kind of confused about why regular folks believe this stuff, or at least what they tell us they believe about why we can't have nice things and where those ideas come from as they destroy the countries that are trying to or have provided nice things for their people. And by nice things, y'all, I'm not talking about a free car, a free penthouse in Manhattan. I'm talking about basic things that all human beings need to survive, like housing, education, a clean and safe environment, healthcare, nice things like basic human rights, the things that all human beings need and have a right to have at the most basic level in order to survive, not to get rich, not to grow powerful, but the most basic things that all human beings everywhere need to literally be able to sustain their existence on Earth. Why don't politicians in the US hate the idea? Or why do politicians and people in the US hate the idea that the government of this country should provide for the basic human rights of its people? And what are we supposed to say to them when they tell us this? Well, that's what I want to get into today because I think it's important for us to stop arguing with these people who believe this, especially online, like I said, for those of you watching on YouTube and Instagram or Facebook or some other internet platform. Nope, I think we stop arguing with the trolls and the bots and the bullies and the provocateurs who just want to goad us into an argument that's not a debate for clicks and likes for them. So let's talk about what we should say, what I think we should say to these people, and leave it there and understand why they believe these things. So, the belief that it is not the government's primary job to take care of its people is actually a deeply held conviction for many people, particularly in the United States and other so called liberal democracies. And I swear, you get right there, and that's a question for me right now. It should be for you because let's be clear on what a liberal democracy is and how it is not the same as liberalism, but it's liberalism that drives what we think is liberal democracy. I know it's confusing. So let's clear up what a liberal democracy is. A liberal democracy is a system of government, while classical liberalism is a political philosophy. So here is where they differ. Classical liberalism focuses on, now listen, classical liberalism focuses on limiting government power to maximize individual and economic personal freedom. This is where I think people get confused about whether we have a conservative or liberal government. because conservatives are basically classical liberals in this regard, because this is their economic and social mantra, that government should be limited and people should have individual freedom. Okay, but liberals, the Democrats, liberals, are also classical liberals in their embrace of neoliberal economic and social policies that are in line with classical liberalism. And then there's liberal democracy, which is what we think we live in. And that focuses on how a state is structured, balancing majority vote with protected individual rights. On paper, and at some stages in the progression of this government, yeah, efforts have been made half heartedly to protect individual rights, but they've never been sincere, comprehensive, and as you can see, they've never been permanent, because the ruling class never intended them to be. And it was the ruling class that created this government, the Constitution, and all of the so called laws that they claim they follow. Classical liberalism views government as a necessary evil that should strictly stick to basic infrastructure and property defense. Liberal democracy views government as a legitimate tool to enact the public will, regulate markets, and provide social safety nets. You see why I said we think we live in a liberal democracy, but we really don't. Yeah, in a liberal democracy, the view on voting and equality uh, differs from classical liberalism, because in classical liberalism, they have historically favored property owning voters over universal suffrage. In a liberal democracy, the mandate is supposed to be for universal suffrage, giving every adult equal voting power, regardless of wealth or status. That's how it's supposed to be. But and then there's the economic approach of these two ideas. In classical liberalism, the demand for the government is strict laissez faire capitalism. Laissez faire is an economic philosophy that opposes government intervention in business and markets. If you were wondering, the term comes from French, meaning let do or let it be. That is what laissez faire means. So they're literally saying to the government, leave the markets alone and let them do what they're going to do. Right? So the core principles of classical liberalism in regard to the government and the market is no regulations. Government should not set prices, wages, or product standards. Free markets, the thing you keep hearing about that they tell you is such a great thing, they believe, classical liberals believe, that supply and demand naturally dictate the production of cost and goods. And of course, they believe in the primacy of private property, that individuals own resources and factories and should be allowed to without any state interference, minimal taxes, corporate and personal income taxes. They want as low as possible, and limited state government. They want the government restricted to just providing for the national defense, policing, and enforcing contracts. They believe this because they say that it drives maximum innovation, lowers consumer prices, and facilitates high economic growth. But does it though? Do it really though? Because do we see what's going on? Of course we do. But liberal democracy, separate and different from classical liberalism, or it's supposed to be, is supposed to allow for diverse economic models. That's true. That is the definition of a liberal democracy. It is supposed to allow for diverse economic models, including heavily regulated economies and welfare policies. Now, if we believe we live in a liberal democracy, and such a system is supposed to allow for diverse economic models, why is there such a hatred of progressive economic policies? Let's be clear, y'all. Zohran Mamdani is not a socialist in the red or dead like me, socialist with a capital S sense. He's a progressive at the left end of progressivism. And that's cool. I'm not knocking it because that's an improvement over fascism, but still, it's not the thing they're terrified of the most. And it doesn't make sense that they're terrified of this thing called socialism or progressivism because in a liberal democracy, alternative and different economic models should be okay, right? But that's not what we live in. So, sure, in a real liberal democracy, capitalism can exist. But here's the sticker. In a liberal democracy, capitalism is also allowed to have influence in government policy. But in a liberal democracy, the government should also incorporate some social safety net economic policies for people to provide stability and some level of protection for them against the whims of the capitalists who play monopoly with the stock market and bankrupt each other, because that affects us. So, this anti socialist, anti communist rhetoric doesn't just come from conservatives. I hope you see this now. We see that the Democratic Party, the so called liberals, are closing ranks to purge any vestige of small s democratic socialists and progressives out of their party, too. So, do we live in a liberal democracy when the liberals hate taking care of the least among us, too, the so called Democrats? Okay, yeah, let me keep going because I don't want to lose people. While the reason politicians and people who believe that the government should not take care of the people in any material way is deployed in the most racist, sexist, xenophobic, ableist, homophobic, and transphobic and violent ways, the beliefs themselves aren't necessarily based in hatred of those people. Not among most individuals, I don't believe. That's just me. I'm just giving you my opinion. But the hate is stoked against those people because they are used, these ideologies are used to justify these ideas that those groups of people don't deserve any of these things. And I think this is true because if regular people understood what they actually believe, they wouldn't support them. So let's talk about where these ideas really come from. Then maybe we can understand why they're used the way they are, and we can have better responses to their arguments that arguing back and forth with people who really do not know what they even believe will do. So let's start with the philosophical argument, classical liberalism and individualism. At the core of this belief is the idea that individual liberty is the highest political value. People like John Locke, Locke, and John Stuart Mill, you're going to have to look them up. I honestly don't care about these people enough to explain to you who they are and where they came up with this stuff. You're going to have to look that up by yourself. Argued that legitimate government exists to protect negative rights. That's what they call them. And negative rights are the right to be free from interference, like protection from violence against you, theft against you, and fraud against you, rather than to provide positive rights, a right to housing, a right to food, or a right to healthcare. Yes, they really did frame this in the context of negative rights and positive rights. So, from this view, requiring the government to take care of the people means empowering the state to tax, regulate, and intrude into private life. That's what they believe. For individualists, this creates a dangerous, slippery slope because they believe a government powerful enough to provide for you is powerful enough to control you. And this is what people will actually say to you if you go back and forth with them long enough. So, what's the counter argument to this? The moral and ethical imperative of social justice and human dignity. Now, when you're arguing with these people, as soon as you say social justice, they're going to shut you down. So I would not recommend using that term. But what I would say that you should tell people that in a civilized society, access to basic necessities like healthcare, food, housing, and education is a fundamental human right. If we're going to talk about negative and positive rights, how about let's talk about human rights? And these things are not a privilege to be earned through labor and the market. You should not have to be able, or you shouldn't have to make a certain amount of money to be able to have a right to access these things. And that's because poverty, illness, and job loss are just things that happen to everybody for a whole lot of reasons. Sometimes it's bad luck. Sometimes people have genetic predispositions towards certain illnesses that are chronic, lifelong illnesses that they need lifelong health care for. Or things like the market and the economic shifts that the market causes are things that create these conditions that people experience. So the reason people need this kind of basic human right help is not because of personal moral failings. It's because everybody experiences bad luck, everybody gets sick, live long enough to get old, you are going to become disabled. And capitalism, we've seen what capitalism and an unregulated market does to people. So society has a collective moral duty to catch people when they fall, or if they might. I would also tell people that a society's true measure isn't how it treats its citizens who can afford these things, but how it protects the people in its society who cannot: the elderly, children, the disabled, and of course, the working poor and the marginalized. But historically, the same people have advocated for using the government to impose on people in this country and around the world the exact things they claim the government is supposed to exist to protect people from, those negative rights. They believe that the government only exists to protect people from violence, theft, and fraud, right? Well, how can the government protect you from those things when the government is doing those things to you? Then you'll hear the economic arguments that are around efficiency and something called the knowledge problem. This is stuff that came from economists like Friedrich Hayek and Milton Friedman, two names that just make my blood boil. And once you start learning about them, they will make your blood boil too. They argued that centralized governments are inherently bad at managing resources. They point to something called the knowledge problem. And you've heard it, this idea that no central planner has enough information to know exactly what millions of diverse individuals need when they need it and at what quality or quantity. They argue that free markets and voluntary charity are more efficient because they allow for decentralized decision making, competition, and price signals. When the government takes over care, they tell you, it often leads to bureaucratic waste, long wait times, and a lack of innovation. And then they'll go further because it seems like they're on a roll and they get all excited when they talk about denying basic human rights to people. They will argue that extensive welfare states require high taxes and that disincentivizes work, investment, and economic growth, ultimately making everyone poorer in the long run. You've heard every single one of these arguments in some kind of form. So, what do you say when people say this stuff? You tell them that economically, robust safety nets act as shock absorbers for the entire national economy. During a recession, right? When people lose jobs through no fault of their own, not because they were lazy, not because they didn't show up, not because they called out, but because the free market was allowed to do what it do, Uh-huh. Unemployment benefits and food assistance allow people to continue buying groceries, paying rent, and spending on the basic goods that they need, again, to survive. This consumer spending prevents the economy, the whole economy, from spiraling deeper into depression. If we're going to make the economic argument that we need to save the economy by not helping people when they fall, so, cutting social safety nets during a downturn, an economic downturn, forces families to stop spending immediately. They lose their job, no more paycheck, there's no social safety net, they have no resources to continue to pay their rent, there are no resources to continue to buy medicine for themselves and their children, there are no resources for them to continue to buy groceries and feed their families. And that's not just if we're talking about the economic argument. That is literally taking money that would be spent in the economy out of the economy if you don't provide resources for those families who now need economic help through no fault of their own, but because of something that was caused by the economy, right? Strong social safety nets actually keep the engine of the economy running even during hard times. So, in real life, if a centralized government doesn't know enough about the basic human needs of all the human beings under their governance, then explain why this non centrally planned government with alleged representatives from all the states at all the state and local levels also seem not to have the knowledge about what the human beings need in their jurisdictions. Because the human beings at the bottom of the economic ladder barely have shelter to keep them from getting rained on, let alone demanding innovation. That's crazy. Or is it that these politicians have the knowledge and they just don't care to do anything about it because their economic futures and fortunes would be impacted if they did? Basically, folks, your elected representatives know you are suffering. They know what you need. They know when. They know why. They know how much. They just make too much money from the corporate interests that want you to be forced to pay for the most basic of these things so they can continue to get rich off of your desperation and your elected representatives that they pay to tell you the government can't or shouldn't do these things. They get rich too. Oh, and that bit about bureaucratic waste, what are they doing with that money that they're keeping and stealing from you and me? I bet they've all got the nicest and biggest houses and cars, multiple cars, and probably multiple houses and yachts, the best and the biggest that you've ever seen. But you are supposed to be thankful you live in a so called liberal democracy where you can vote for politicians to keep you living in your shack. And when you can't afford that, well, go on and live on the street so they can arrest you, lock you up, criminalize you, and justify making you a modern day slave. Hey, but at least you're free while they're free on their taxpayer funded vacations. Yeah. Okay, folks, it is 30 minutes past the hour. Woo, we're going to have some more fun on the other side of this station break. So, engineer extraordinaire, what do we have on tap for the people today?
WPFW continues to celebrate our 50th year with our third benefit concert at the Palisades Hub on Sunday, July 26th from 4 until 6 in the afternoon, including live jazz music by local artists. There will be a performance by Washington pianist Janelle Gill leading a trio with opening set by bassist vocalist Zoe Jorgensen accompanied by guitarist Parker Spears. More information about attending this event is on our homepage, wpfw.org. Help to keep jazz and justice on the air. WPFW, building a better world one performance at a time.
DC City, the time has come. DC City, for us to be one.
It is time for us to be one. Thank you so much for that information. And I do want to let you know that tomorrow from 2 to 5 p.m. at Plymouth Congregational United Church of Christ, there will be a public political education session on understanding capitalism. From 2 to 5 p.m., you can go to the Facebook page of Plymouth Congregational United Church of Christ, which is facebook.com/Plymouth UCC BOSA. For more information, you can register at the QR code on the post. Hope to see you there tomorrow because yours truly is leading that session. So please show up. We would love to see you. All right, let's get back. Oh, rats, I forgot. I can't do the inducements. Sorry. Go to the page and find more information. Oops. Do not need to get this station in trouble. So let's get back to this conversation about what we say to the people who tell us that we don't deserve to have nice things like basic human rights guaranteed by the government. You always hear the moral and psychological arguments about self reliance and dignity, right? These people will say things to you like people who are taken care of by the state undermine their sense of human dignity and personal agency. I swear, I don't know where they came up with that foolishness, but they do argue that human flourishing comes from solving one's own problems, working hard, and providing for one's family. They say when the government guarantees a baseline of care, it creates a moral hazard, reducing the individual's incentive to work, save, or prepare for the future. Conversely, they believe that requiring people to fend for themselves fosters resilience, innovation, and a stronger work ethic. Whew. Now, I know when you hear that argument, you want to say words that I cannot repeat on this air, but I have said plenty of times, but that is also not an appropriate response to this ridiculous idea. Because the truth about the productivity and innovation argument is that these people assume that safety nets make workers particularly but people in general lazy. But the data actually shows the opposite. When the government provides a baseline of care, not a free ride throughout life as people believe, here's what actually happens. Workers feel empowered to take risks. If your health care is not tied to your employer, to your job, you're more likely to quit a dead end, unfulfilling job, start a new business, or go back to school to retrain yourself for a new industry. This is proven and documented. This actually does providing a baseline of care for people so that they feel confident that they can take risks. And if the risk doesn't turn out in their favor, they're not going to lose everything and end up on the street. This actually drives innovation and labor mobility. It also creates a healthier and more educated workforce because a child who has access to free school meals and regular checkups perform better academically. An adult who can afford mental health care or physical therapy and basic dental and vision is more productive on the job. Investing in human capital actually yields a massive return on investment for the national GDP, not just for the individual person, but that is never the capital that capitalists want to invest their capital in. They just want to use us to make them more capital and tell us we should be glad they're doing that, or else we'd all be lazy roustabout standing in bread lines. Oh, oh, wait a minute. We already have bread lines. that people who work several jobs already have to use to make sure their kids eat. Then there's this principle of subsidiarity. I didn't know that's what it was called, but yeah, this principle is very prominent in both conservative and political thought, conservative political thought rather, and Catholic school teaching. And this idea is that social problems should be solved at the most immediate local level possible. And this is when they'll say things like a family should take care of its members. If not, the community or the church should step in. And then if they don't do it, then the local government. And only as a last resort should the federal government do anything. And these people who believe in subsidiarity argue that federal bureaucracies are too distant to understand local nuances. So they prefer that care be administered by families, religious organizations, and private charities, which they say are more compassionate and accountable. And none of that is true, by the way. They don't believe that. They know that's not true. So the answer to this argument, I think, is that long-term cost savings actually happens when you provide a basic standard of care, basic human rights to people. Because regardless of how one feels about charity and family and churches and taking care of their own problems, it is fiscally irresponsible not to have a strong safety net, because untreated problems become exponentially more expensive to solve the longer they go unsolved. Because if the family is unable to address their problems because they don't have the resources to, and charity through churches or other religious organizations don't have the resources to address the problem or won't address the problem because they don't like the people they're supposed to help, or they only want to help the members of their congregations and faith traditions, or they're just stingy, and that's just honestly most of them, or the established charitable organizations don't have the resources to solve local and immediate problems, then the problems don't get solved, do they? The problems grow, they get bigger, and they affect more and more people. And that is exactly the reality we live in right now and have, well, pretty much the whole time. For example, providing free preventative care like blood pressure medication or prenatal vitamins and checkups is vastly cheaper than paying for emergency stroke treatments, triple bypass surgeries, premature NICU stays, or disability benefits later. Also, providing affordable housing, because that's the thing now, because now instead of everybody just saying, look, housing is a human right, okay, we're using this silly word affordability. All right, do what you got to do. But providing affordable housing for people, especially for homeless people with mental illness or other health problems, is cheaper than the costs of repeated emergency room visits, jail time, and police interventions. So the safety net is an investment that saves taxpayer money in the long run. Look, you don't have to like the people the government should be helping, but I guarantee you that we are paying much, much more for how the government is not helping people now than we would have paid if we voted for politicians, well, if we had politicians whose policies could have helped people long ago. These problems would be much smaller, less pervasive, and much less expensive to manage and address if we had politicians who wanted to do those things. But hey, we free, y'all. Free from giving a damn about other people, basically. Also, I'm sure you've heard the argument that is called the night watchman state view. This comes from libertarians as well as classical conservatives who believe the government has only one legitimate job: to protect citizens from external threats, and that's the military, to fund the military, and internal harm, to fund the police and the legal system. That's what the night watchman, and yes, that's exactly why. Uh-huh. So in this view, their idea of life, liberty, and property, not the pursuit of happiness, but property, are the only things the state is contracted to defend. Taking care of people's health, income, or housing is seen as an overreach that extends the government's core mandate. And they often point to the US Constitution, which lists very specific federal duties like providing a post office and maintaining the military, but does not mention a duty to provide general welfare through direct aid. Okay, this one might take a little bit more time because I bet you're thinking, like I did when I first read and understood this theory, but doesn't the preamble to the Constitution say that the government's job is to provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity do ordain and establish this? Yes, we all know the Schoolhouse Rock song. But did you know that the debate over the phrase promote the general welfare in the preamble has been going on for like 150 years? And it centers on two critical questions that have been argued since the nation's so called founding. What does promote mean? And what does general welfare mean? Yeah, they're playing semantics with our lives, y'all. The answer shapes how we view the government's role in providing for its people. People will say that the preamble, its legal function is not to establish rights. The U.S. Supreme Court held that the preamble itself does not grant any substantive power to the government. Instead, it acts as an introductory statement announcing the Constitution's broad purposes and the intentions of we, the people, in establishing the government. The actual enforceable powers are listed in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. And this is the legal framing. The question is whether the phrase promote the general welfare in the preamble and the taxing and spending clause is a guiding principle, a good idea, or a specific grant of authority. This is what we are going to do. So this linguistic back and forth over promote and provide is a key argument for those who oppose a broad interpretation, because the deliberate choice, this is a deliberate choice of words, they say. The Constitution says the government should promote the general welfare, not provide for it. They say this, playing these word games, because they say that provide implies direct action and the furnishing of goods and services, but promote implies helping, encouraging, and fostering an environment for something to flourish. So, from this perspective, the government's role is to create conditions, they say, such as a legal or a stable legal system, economic opportunities, and a national defense that allow citizens and states to provide for their own welfare. Directly handing out benefits, they will say, is an overreach that goes beyond this intended function. That's the argument. And my response is, what happens when with those conditions the government is supposed to create, when they're not producing a stable, fair, unbiased situation or conditions, or providing any opportunities for the general public to take advantage of? What if, I ask, and I think you should too, what if the conditions the government creates are, instead of conditions for people to provide for their own welfare, what if those conditions create various systems of discrimination, oppression, and denial of dignity and rights? Isn't that a government overreach? People are mad that the government might go too far and hand people it's abused for 288 years a check. And that's just the first phase of the abuse, but don't want to talk about the government overreach of legally sanctioning those centuries of abuse and continuing to sanction the abuse that continues and the genocide before and during of the native peoples and the continued racist oppression of those groups, as well as varying oppressions in government institutions focusing toward women, gender nonconforming people, Black people, the disabled, the elderly. No, they don't want to talk about that as government overreach, but you should. Every time they bring up government overreach, don't let them keep playing word games with life and death, especially yours and nobody else's. And then, of course, there's this debate that Alexander Hamilton and James Madison had about this issue. And they disagreed on the meaning of general welfare or the general welfare clause. Now, look, I'm just going to say it. I don't care what those two rich landowning, slave owning, and related to slave owning powerful white men argued over. James Madison enslaved our ancestors. Alexander Hamilton did not enslave our ancestors, and he did start the New York Manumission Society. But did you know that Alexander Hamilton's wife was a member of the famous Schuyler family, Schuyler, probably mispronounced that. That's why I spelled it for you. Family of New York that did own slaves. But for over 150 years, their debate dominated beyond their lives, and you still hear these arguments. And this argument is still, or it had been, pretty theoretical, at least for some people, but it won't never theoretical for us. But during the 1930s, the New Deal era happened. And then the Supreme Court finally had to decide between these two views because these people took the US government to court over implementing the New Deal. So the Supreme Court ruled in 1936 in United States v. Butler. They sided with Alexander Hamilton's broader interpretation that the government is supposed to provide for the general welfare. The court ruled that the power of Congress to spend money is not confined to the other enumerated powers listed in Article 1, Section 8. Instead, Congress has a broad, independent authority to tax and spend for the general welfare. Here's the kicker and the twist and the catch, with one major condition. The spending must be for the nation as a whole, not for local or special interests. You knew there was a catch, and there it is. This ruling gave the federal government wide latitude to create programs like Social Security, Medicare, and other social safety nets. So, having lost in the Supreme Court over the words provide and promote, then the people who don't like the idea of any kind of welfare or social safety net came up with the general versus individual welfare argument. Yep, they would not let it go. Proponents of a limited government argue that general welfare means the collective good of the entire nation, not the specific welfare of individual citizens or particular groups. From this perspective, programs designed to help specific segments of society, like the poor or the elderly, or, I don't know, the disabled, the descendants of enslaved people, gender non-conforming people who are discriminated against, you see where I'm going. This they say are a form of individual welfare, which is not authorized by the Constitution. Their view holds that such matters should be handled by, we already talked about it, families, local communities, charities, and state governments. But you know what? This makes no damn sense, y'all. Because all human beings get sick, grow old, become disabled, and see what happens. See what happens when you get old, and that arthritis makes you get out the bed real slow. And if the government itself causes poverty with policies that prioritize the demands of monopoly capitalists over the basic human needs of the people. It advances policies that cause specific harm to specific groups of people, that impose poverty and precarity or even violence upon them. Then those individual groups are collectively being screwed over by the same government. So, no, when the government causes specific harm to individual groups of people, then the government nor its supporters have any logical or reasonable right to claim that the government can only provide remedy to the general population. Get out of here. The general population was not subjected to mass incarceration, were they? Are they? And then I love y'all when they come to the extra, that the hyper, just they go nuts with the reaction against government overreach in examples that, yeah, they think they make sense, but they don't. Like many people's distrust of government really stems from their belief that governments that do provide basic care for all its citizens were totalitarian regimes, because that's what they were told, where where the state's provision of care was used as a tool for absolute control. And they will give you examples like, look at what happened to the Soviet Union, and look at Nazi Germany. They were socialists, Lord have mercy. Yeah. Or they'll say Cuba and Nazi Germany, or Venezuela and Nazi. You see where this is going. The thing is, those countries, Soviet Union, Cuba, Venezuela, are not and were not totalitarian governments. Capitalists want you to believe they are, because they don't want you to want the kinds of economies they had and have today in Cuba, Venezuela. Let's be clear, Russia today is a capitalist country that still has some vestiges of its former Soviet social policies and infrastructure still in place. But Putin is no communist. He even said so. But then think about it, y'all. What have we learned about those countries through the history of US intervention in and against them? They have been militarily attacked by the US government, claiming that it had to do that to destroy these so called totalitarian regimes that the people in these countries actually held elections for. So how is it a totalitarian government when they had elections and voted for? Yeah, if the people voted for their leaders and the economic policies for their country, how is it a totalitarian regime? Even if people don't think these places are democracies, and they are, they're actually closer. Okay, but is it government overreach on a global scale for the US government to decide to change another country's democratically elected government? The US is not bringing democracy to the people of those countries. US and Western capitalists are destroying their economies to pave the way for a capitalist takeover. Not so you and I can be more free and have more liberty, but so Elon Musk, that weirdo who owns Palantir, Jeff Bezos, and all the other fascist tech lords and their Zionist, fascist, imperialist political sycophants in both parties in this country and throughout the West can get richer. And when they point to failing public school systems in this country, like the VA healthcare standards and the long wait lines, or the inefficiencies of the DMV as evidence that the government in this country simply cannot deliver services with the same quality or accountability as the private sector, that is really an excuse to cover for the fact that the constant underfunding of public services and infrastructure demanded by the free market capitalists has created the conditions they claim providing for the poor's causes. Listen, here's what we need to be telling people when they bring this foolishness up, and then just drop it on the table and walk the heck away and go on about your life. In nations with strong social safety nets, citizens view their taxes not as a burden, but as insurance premiums paid into a collective pool for the benefit of everyone. Just like you pay your insurance hoping you never have a crash, But when you do, you are so glad it's covered. You pay into Social Security hoping you never need long term unemployment. This creates social trust, the knowledge that if you lose your job tomorrow, you won't lose your home or your health benefits or your life as a result. This low level, this is the bottom, lowest bar of existential anxiety, correlates with higher levels of general happiness, lower crime rates, stronger civic participations. Citizens in these countries report higher levels of trust in their government and in their fellow citizens. That's why these countries, when they're polled and show people in them are happier, it's because they're not terrified they're going to lose everything and they don't have to sleep on the street. If something in their life goes wrong, they can take risks, they can make changes, and they know that their government will do everything they can to make sure they are cared for as they grow and expand and pursue life. If people are mad about inefficiency in public infrastructure, remind them that the free market, left to its own devices, systematically fails to provide certain essential goods. It's been proven over and over again throughout history. Just look at private health insurance companies and the profit motive they have to deny coverage to the sick, excluding people with pre existing conditions, and charging the elderly exorbitant rates. And private markets also fail to provide efficient things like childcare because the cost to produce safe, high quality care is higher than what most parents can afford. Most, unless they're rich. In these cases, the government must step in as the provider of last resort to ensure these critical services are available to everyone and not just the wealthy. So, this is how I think we should engage in these conversations with these folks who have these ideas. When they throw them at us, and they act as if they are bowling us over with facts. They don't have facts. They actually do have feelings. That's what they're telling you. Their feelings about poor people and the people who would receive these benefits. Our responsibility is to respond to them with the actual facts and leave those facts right there at their feet. Walk on away and go on with your life. I think we will all be better off if we change it up and do it that way. All right, y'all, I'm out of time. Thank you so much for joining me today here on Darker Than Blue. We'll be back next week. But until then, a luta continua. The struggle continues. But if we keep fighting and if we keep telling people facts, not feelings, not fictions, victory is certain. Victoria asserta. Peace. That's it for tonight, y'all. I got a teaching to prepare for, a PE, public PE session at my church to prepare for. So I'm doing that. We will try to videotape it. We were going to try to live stream it. I just don't have enough time to do it. And I just don't have enough people to man the live stream. So this first session, this is the first of the, I think it's 9 sessions in my church's very first public political education series. So I don't care what people have to say about anything. We are doing the work. So if you are in the DC, Maryland, and Virginia area, let me share the screen now because I can, and I'm not on WPFW anymore, and I can just show this to you. Whoops. There we go. Uh-oh. Let's get this right. What am I doing? I don't know. There we go. See, now my things just don't want to work right. Everything just goes haywire. All right. There we are. Okay. I'm also extremely tired, so I just cannot find things. Oh my gosh. So I think that's what I am sharing for you. And of course, it's acting foolish. So let me just grab the damn picture. Because that's how it be sometimes. My tech has been acting a fool. There we go. All right. So let me just share this with you so you can see it, screenshot it. There you go. And please screenshot it, register at the QR code. You will get a registration confirmation link when you register at the QR code for the Zoom. There is no Zoom for this particular session. It is in person. However, we will have a video. And then after the political education session, you know what I'm fitting to do? I'm fitting to take my tired behind, if I can do it, and go agitate at the what is it the match. I think it's England is playing, and we're going to be agitating for Palestine. And if I can't make it, it's just because I have passed out, because I got a 10 o'clock in the morning meeting. I got this thing at 2 o'clock, and I don't know why I'm thinking right now that I am going to be physically able to take my ass out to the mall, but I want to so bad, and I'm going to try. And I probably need to do what No Face SE is saying, and get some rest. But you know how I am. I'm an organizer, and rest is never the first thing I'm thinking about, but it really should be. Thank you all so much for joining, for sticking around for a couple of minutes. Please, 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 if you're in the DC, Maryland, and Virginia area, and you can come out to Plymouth Congregational United Church of Christ tomorrow, come hang out with us for the teach-in. We'll have food, we'll have games, and I think we're going to have a good time. Until next time, y'all, peace. Thank you so much. Woo, I need to go. I need to go do some stuff. Good grief. I need to go outside, take a walk.